It's another Fair Folk Friday, and today we're going to talk about the Rusalka. There's a couple different versions of what exactly the Rusalka is. The most common that I've heard is the Polish version, in which it is women who were killed on their wedding day, and other times it just seems to be generally anyone who were either killed in water or whose bodies were disposed of in water. Though in most of the stories it is the case that unfortunately the woman was murdered by their male lover. And this is a very interesting creature because they tend to form groups. There always seems to be groups of 3 or more Rusalkas, and they generally just frolic in either the lakes or the forest of, swampy forest, and they generally have a good time until humans come around, because then they're reminded they're undead, especially if those humans are men. They most often have either golden or red hair. Red hair in, Slavic mythology in general, but especially, in my experience in Polish mythology, generally means you have the possibility of being so many of their monsters. But if you are a man and you catch them frolicking, regardless of their original hair color, their hair color will turn green and will envelop you. And depending on the myth, they will either drag you down so that you can be drowned, or they will tickle you to death with their hair. Tickling you to death is also a very common motive. Most often wearing, white, flowy dresses, much like wedding gowns, if they're wearing anything at all. I can already feel the comment section just being full of my mutuals going, "Same, girl." I'll be honest, I don't blame any of you. It just is very interesting to me that the folklore of this creature does focus on that they're just trying to have a good time until humans come around, which just makes this creature all the more fascinating and sad, but no less dangerous. It's another Fair Folk Friday. Oh, that boy's got a touch of the Lawrence. If you're familiar with that phrase, then you already know we're talking about Lazy Lawrence, who is a sprite that is said to inhabit the New Forest area by Southampton, England. He's mostly known for making people lazy. But you may not know that he is actually heavily associated with the protection of orchards and cider. However, despite his own laziness, which is the source of many humorous stories, he will also give particularly rude tourist to the forest indigestion and nightmares, basically their laziness putting them into a dream state that is not pleasant. The after effect of both the indigestion and the nightmares being numerous cases of stomach cramps. The worst punishments seeming to be saved for those who steal apples from the forest. Kind of scary to think what he would do if he would actually put energy into his work. And of course, as a folklorist and a pagan, just be respectful of fruit trees. He's certainly not the only figure who fits this motif. And thank you for watching. And remember to be vigilant. I would like to start this off by apologizing to the Scottish community. What a plague is this o' mine, when a stake is he, though I hap him o'er the head, as cozy as can be. Sleep, and let me to my work. And they clace to Anne, Jenny wi' the iron teeth, come and take the beard. It's another Fair Folk Friday, and as you probably guessed, today we're talking about Jenny with the iron teeth, also known as Jenny with the iron teeth. And Jenny with the iron teeth is a figure of Scottish folklore. And as you can see here, she is immortalized in a poem by Alexander Anderson. So Jenny is actually a fairly common name attributed to various female figures within Scottish folklore, such as, for example, an earlier episode was talking about Jenny Greenteeth. But Jenny with the iron teeth is a much different monster altogether, as she's not necessarily a hag of any form, more of a vampire, with a very selective taste in her victims, particularly being children who are still up at night, not in bed. Her teeth described as aeon or iron is to indicate a particularly painful bite, and is actually a fairly interesting figure in a moment in Scottish history, particularly in Glasgow. So the story of Jenny with the Iron Teeth has, kept children at least snuggled into bed as to avoid her wrath, so to speak. However, Glasgow children one night weren't having that. They armed themselves and rushed the southern necropolis of Glasgow, hunting for Jenny with the Iron Teeth, as so they can stay up as long as they want. Unfortunately, multiple people were assaulted during this event, and some children had even claimed to have killed Jenny. However, no body was ever found. Now, this may have also been the response of apparently 2 children had gone missing, described in this article as having been devoured. But as this article also states, this may have been children's overactive imagination from film or comics. Many of the Glaswegian children claim that Jenny with the Iron Teeth was indeed murdered that night. Even with no body ever found, many of them, until their dying breath, still clung to this story. Sightings of her in other locations do seem to be somewhat prevalent if you look hard enough. Perhaps it was a coven of vampires with iron teeth. Perhaps Jenny learned her lesson about messing with Glasgow. The surly blackthorn is a wanderer, a wood that the artificer burns not. Throughout his body, though it be scanty, birds and their flocks warble. It's another Fairfolk Friday, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Lunantishee. Now, the Lunantishee is both the name of the basically inhabitants, the protectors of blackthorn plants, and a holiday that is on November 11th that they basically go out of their blackthorn trees. There's a lot of folklore, most of it either directly correlating to or about the Lunantishee. Specifically about, the holiday named after them. And there's a lot. Like, there's pig people. There's a lot. But 10 days after the Cailleach, does her own thing where she comes out and says, oh, it's my time of the year. On November 11th, the Lunantishee have their own festival. But who are the Lunantishee? Well, they're very thorny moon fairies, effectively. They're generally about the size of children, but they have, inhumanly long arms. They often climb the blackthorn plants that they are in. And they are the protectors of blackthorn trees in a variety of ways, and are incredibly unfriendly. They will often curse mortals for just going near their blackthorn tree. Now, the only time that they are said to leave their blackthorn tree is, as I said, November 11th, which is, in some cases, said to be more or less the start of Samhain, in the sense of Samhain being a season and not a holiday. But, there's a variety of other interpretations of what the holiday is about. But it is said that during the full moon, they will also leave to specifically do their own rituals towards the moon goddess. Now, I've seen both Welsh and Irish interpretations of this, so effectively this would either be Danu herself, or the goddess of Welsh mythology known as a Rhaenyraad. And depending on who you talk to, the Lunantishee are also the spirits that are inside shillelaghs, which are often made with blackthorn. The blackthorn is full of spines, but how the children delight in its fruit. It's another Fairfolk Friday! Now, in insular Celtic lore, you're going to find a lot that there is the phrase, good enough to stay out of hell, but too evil to go to heaven. A lot of the times, this is either going to be a reference to either someone having reincarnated from a druid, or just in general being a pagan, and that's just how their soul is. Like, they can't get into hell or heaven. In Cornwall, the word for this is a muryan, which is also their word for ant. Specifically, the Muryans are described to be the souls of the ancient pagans, who are just kind of in this in-between state. Now, they share the same word as the Cornish word for ants, because basically they believed that the ancient pagans could transform into birds and other things, but every time they transformed back into their human form, they would be rather small. So over time, being unable to go to heaven or hell, they've gotten to quite a small size. And to this day, the Cornish people believe that it is unlucky to step on an ant because you possibly accidentally stepped on a muryan. It's another Fair Folk Friday. Today we're talking about the reason that bovinophobia was actually pretty common in North England. Today we're going to talk about the guy trash, which is on the list of entities that are death portents, meaning that seeing them is an omen of death. Now, aside from being cows, the description of them isn't always necessarily succinct or linked to each other in any way, except just always described as looking evil. Now, there are some etymologically related and similar mist creatures of similar names, including just another figure, usually from your, slightly further south, also called the guy trash, just also spelt differently. Just specifically the incredibly northern England variant of the guy trash seems to always be bovine, while the other variations of this are generally said to be shapeshifters just preferring a specific shape, such as the more common and probably understandable black dog. There's a lot of interesting theories on specifically why a cow, such as the idea that maybe wild cows before domestication were seen as such a sign, especially if they were particularly violent. Wild cattle also being generally described as shaggy, so similar creatures such as the shaggy black dog. But to the best of my knowledge, most of these are just theories, and there doesn't seem to be, aside from this legend, a particular reason why a cow would be considered a death portent, but it's fascinating to me. Thank you for watching. It's another Fair Folk Friday. Fair Folk Weekend, whatever. But did you know that the Aurora Borealis has some folkloric connections to the Sidhe? Specifically, that when we are watching the Aurora Borealis, we are watching a fight between the Slaug and the Furchlis, or the Nimblemen. Now, there's a couple different variations of why this fight is happening. However, it does seem to put the Slaug in a negative aspect and the Nimblemen in a more benevolent light, with one story saying that basically there are these two chiefs of two different factions of these people, and they are both competing basically for the affections of a specific fairy queen. The red sky that sometimes appears under the Aurora Borealis being the blood of the wounded. This blood is also known to fall to earth and be various forms of red-colored stone. And in Ireland, the Aurora Borealis has a different myth altogether, being that what we are witnessing is basically some form of celebration of the Sidhe, in the sense that what's happening is that the Sidhe are dancing for a fairy king. And according to, at the very least, William Allingham, I believe is how you pronounce that, his poem called The Fairies, this is happening because the king is dining with a fairy queen. And Lawrence Spence has a different theory to what the Aurora Borealis is, believing that the Aurora Borealis are fallen angels whose fall was arrested before they hit the earth. I personally was taught a combination of the first two, basically that there is a battle that happens and whoever wins gets the party. Though I'm certainly not unfamiliar with the Spence version of things, as that is most certainly the preferred folklore of the majority of the Christian populace. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant. It's another Fairfolk Friday, and today's Fairfolk is certainly a reminder of how menacing they can be in a variety of circumstances. And today we're talking about the Scottish Fairfolk known as Big Ears, who is described as a demonic-looking cat of giant size and, well, big ears, and is primarily associated with a ritual called the Tag Harem, which involves cats and would make you sad if I described the events that have to happen for that ritual. But if you completed this ritual, Big Ears would indeed grant your wishes. The last time that this ritual was done is believed to be the 17th century by Alan and Lachlan MacLean, who completed this ritual over 4 days while fasting to secure a boon, and apparently, according to records, Big Ears did indeed appear, taking up the majority of the barn that they did the ritual in, and was accompanied by an army of smaller demonic-looking cats that howled. And whenever records of exactly what the wish granted by Big Ears was and how it was, came to fruition, there's always a twist to it. There are also legends of a false church in Scotland where a minister performed this ritual for divination purposes, and afterwards, even though he got the information, he was turned into stone. He was petrified, and that petrified minister slowly turned into a pillar, never able to return to his pulpit. Some actions aren't worth the knowledge. Thank you for watching. It's another Fairfolk Friday, and there's some pretty fun names in this one. Fortunately, it might not get through certain filters that TikTok has, so if you liked this video, please press all of the buttons. And today we're going to talk about Melch Dick, who is a Fairfolk from Yorkshire, specifically heavily associated with the protection of nuts. His job being to protect unripe nuts from being protected by children, and whenever he is described as a wood demon with the appearance of the devil. Now that being said, Melch here is mostly associated with the West Riding of Yorkshire. So he's heavily associated with this duty in this particular location. Now the rest of Yorkshire, and a decent amount of a lot of the surrounding area, actually seems to have another spirit for a lot of this, and that is Churn Milk Peg, which is a nickname I can imagine a lot of Quink Talk having. And having at least 2 spirits for the protection of nuts shows the importance of nuts within a lot of medieval society, especially for the area. There are many references to Sunday nut picking in medieval literature. Nuts have a lot of fertility aspects to them, as well as it was just very important economically to the area. I just find it really interesting that the particular Fairfolk of a particular region is said to be so much scarier. Like, are West Riding Yorkshire kids really that bad? That he needed to do this? It's another Fairfolk Friday! Now, when talking about the Fairfolk, the actual folklore of the Bretons often has a tendency to get lost. So today we're going to talk about the 7 Whistlers. The 7 Whistlers are spirits that are kind of similar to banshees, at least in purpose. They're death portents. They're actually really interesting, mostly there are some legends where they're alone, and there are others where they are intrinsically tied to Gabriel's hounds, which are hounds that serve, again, a similar purpose. Though specifically the Gabriel hounds have the faces of humans, but both these hounds and these whisperers, these birds, were signs that you were likely to die soon, or at the very least be incredibly ill. And while not shown to be particularly violent, they were still not something that, the ancient Brits wanted to come across. From my resources, no one has written down any way to ward off these creatures, but they're mostly just signs of the omen and not the cause of anything. Thank you for watching, and remember to be vigilant.